I met Sarah during our junior year of college. She was sitting in the back of the lecture hall, scribbling furiously in a notebook while everyone else dozed through a lecture on 18th century literature. Something about her energy, so focused, so determined, drew me in. I'd never been one to make bold moves, but with Sarah, I found myself casually dropping a question about the class after the lecture. She looked up, blinked, and smiled, a smile that would change everything. From that day on, we were nearly inseparable. Study sessions turned into coffee dates turned into late-night walks, and those walks led to confessions about our dreams, fears, and everything in between. Sarah wanted to be a writer. I wanted to build something meaningful, though at the time, I wasn't sure what that meant. By the time we graduated, we knew we were meant to be together. 3 years later, we stood in front of our closest friends and family, saying vows we thought we understood at the time. The first few years of marriage were everything I'd hoped for. We moved into a small house in the suburbs, the kind of place where neighbors waved at you while mowing their lawns. Our son, Ethan, was born 2 years after the wedding, followed by our daughter, Lily, a year and a half later. Parenthood brought its challenges, sleepless nights, arguments about who would handle which chores. But Sarah and I faced them together. We were a team, or so I believed. Even when life was chaotic, we found ways to keep things fun. Our group of college friends, many of whom had settled nearby, held regular get-togethers. These gatherings were our escape. Kids stayed with babysitters, and we reverted to our younger, carefree selves at least for an evening. It was during one of these parties, about 6 years into our marriage, that everything began to shift. The party was hosted by Nick and Olivia, our closest couple friends. Nick was loud and opinionated, always steering conversations toward controversial topics, while Olivia balanced him out with her wit and calm demeanor. This time, Nick brought up the idea of a hall pass. If you could have a one-night stand with any celebrity, he said, grinning like a teenager, who would it be? There was laughter and groaning around the table. Olivia rolled her eyes but played along. I don't need a hall pass. I've already got the perfect guy, she said, leaning into Nick, who kissed her cheek amid our groans. When it was Sarah's turn, she laughed nervously. I don't know. Chris Hemsworth, maybe? The group erupted in playful teasing. Oh, come on, Nick said. You've thought about this. Then it was my turn. Pass, I said, shaking my head. This is just a game, right? No point in playing it. Nick looked mock-offended. Where's the fun in that? Look, I said, keeping my tone light, Sarah and I have a great thing going. Why mess with hypothetical nonsense? Sarah reached for my hand and gave it a squeeze. I agree, she said. It's just a silly game. Life continued as usual after that night. Or so I thought. Looking back, there were subtle signs that something had shifted, but at the time, I dismissed them as the normal ups and downs of marriage. Sarah seemed quieter, more distracted. She spent more time on her phone, claiming she was catching up with work or reading. I was busy with a promotion at work, juggling late hours and weekend meetings, so I didn't question it too much. We celebrated our 7th anniversary with a quiet dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. Sarah wore a new dress, and for a moment, everything felt like it used to. Easy, comfortable, safe. But even then, there was a tension I couldn't quite place, like something unspoken hanging between us. 15 years into our marriage, life had settled into a predictable rhythm. Ethan was in high school, Lily in middle school, and Sarah had recently taken on a more demanding role at work. She seemed excited about the opportunity, though the travel it required meant she was often away. I supported her as best as I could, holding down the fort at home while managing my own hectic job. Still, the distance between us was growing, not just physically, but emotionally. When Sarah mentioned the conference in Los Angeles, I didn't think much of it. She'd traveled for work before, and while I missed her during these trips, I trusted her. After all, we had built our life on a foundation of shared values, hadn't we? The night she left, I stayed up late working on a project for Ethan's robotics club. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Sarah. Seeing her name on the screen brought a smile to my face. I assumed she was calling to check in, maybe to say goodnight. Hey, I said, picking up. How's LA? There was a pause before she spoke, and when she did, her voice was strange, hesitant, almost playful. Hey, Mark. I wanted to let you know something. I frowned, setting down the screwdriver I'd been holding. Everything okay? Another pause. Do you remember that hall pass game we talked about years ago? My stomach tightened. Yeah. Why? Well, she hesitated, and I could hear the faint sound of music and laughter in the background. I just wanted to tell you that I'm going to use mine tonight. I blinked, sure I'd misheard her. What? You know, the hall pass, she said, her tone light, almost casual. I ran into someone a celebrity, actually, and well, I figured, why not? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Sarah, are you serious right now? What the hell are you talking about? It's just one night, Mark, she said, her voice softening, as if she were trying to soothe me. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything? I repeated, my voice rising. Are you out of your mind? We have a family, Sarah. You're my wife. I don't want to fight, she said, her tone growing colder. I just thought you should know. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there in stunned silence, the phone still clutched in my hand. My mind raced, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. This couldn't be real. Sarah wouldn't do this. She couldn't. I tried calling her back, but the call went straight to voicemail. I sent a flurry of texts, each more desperate than the last, but there was no response. Panic set in. I paced the living room, my thoughts spiraling. Who was she with? Was it really a celebrity? Or had she used that as an excuse? Had this been planned all along? The questions were endless, and the answers felt impossibly far away. I barely slept that night, my mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and confusion. The next morning, I dropped the kids off at school, plastering on a calm demeanor that felt like a mask. Inside, I was falling apart. I called Sarah again, but once again, it went straight to voicemail. I considered reaching out to her coworkers, but what would I say? How could I explain this without humiliating myself? By the time Sarah finally called back later that afternoon, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. Where the hell have you been? I demanded the moment I answered. I told you, Mark, she said, her tone maddeningly calm. I needed a night to myself. A night to yourself? I spat. You mean a night with some stranger? Do you even hear yourself right now? She sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Mark, I don't want to argue about this. It's done. Let's just move on. Move on? I repeated, incredulous. You think we can just move on from this? I don't see why not, she said. It was one night. It doesn't change anything. Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I knew it would be pointless. The Sarah I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat alone in the darkened living room, replaying our conversation in my mind. My hands shook as I typed her name into a search engine, desperate for clues. Was she lying about the celebrity? Was this part of some larger pattern I'd missed? As I scrolled through her social media accounts, a sinking feeling settled in my chest. There were no recent posts, no clues to her whereabouts. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. The days that followed were a blur. Sarah returned from Los Angeles acting as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't look at her the same way. Every interaction was tinged with suspicion, every word laced with bitterness. The trust we'd built over 15 years of marriage had been shattered, and I had no idea how to piece it back together. I barely slept after that phone call, my mind consumed by a toxic mix of rage and disbelief. The thought of Sarah being with another man, any man, let alone one she claimed was a celebrity, made my stomach churn. The betrayal felt unreal, like I was stuck in someone else's nightmare. But the next morning brought no relief, only more questions. I called Brian, my oldest and closest friend. Brian had been my rock through thick and thin, the one person I could trust to give it to me straight. Mark, you sound like hell. What's going on? He asked as soon as he picked up. I hesitated, unsure how to even start. It's Sarah, I said finally. She called me last night. Said she was using her hall pass. Brian let out a low whistle. Are you serious? Dead serious, I said, pacing the living room. She said it was some celebrity, but she wouldn't say who. Then she hung up and wouldn't answer my calls. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Brian said, I think you should sit down for this. Brian explained that one of his colleagues, Sam, had been at the same conference in Los Angeles. Sam had seen Sarah at the hotel bar, chatting with a man she clearly thought was famous. They'd left together not long after, heading upstairs. She really thought he was a celebrity? I asked, my voice hollow. Apparently, Brian said. But here's the kicker. Sam knows the guy. He's not a celebrity. He's some sleazy consultant who pretends to be someone famous to pick up women at these events. I sat down hard on the couch, the weight of Brian's words crushing me. It was one thing to know Sarah had cheated. It was another to realize she'd been duped by a fraud. My anger shifted, deepening into something darker. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd humiliated herself, and by extension, our entire family. When Sarah came home that evening, I was waiting for her. She walked through the door, setting her suitcase down with a tired sigh. Hey, she said, smiling like nothing had happened. How are the kids? I didn't respond. I just stared at her, my arms crossed. The smile faded from her face. What's wrong? She asked, her brow furrowing. You tell me, I said, my voice cold. How was your hall pass? Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely stunned. But then her expression shifted to something almost defensive. I was going to tell you, she said, dropping her purse on the counter. It was just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? I repeated, my voice rising. Sarah, are you even listening to yourself? You cheated on me. On us. On our family. It wasn't cheating, she said, crossing her arms. We talked about this. The hall pass was always hypothetical, but it wasn't off the table. Are you kidding me? I snapped. I told you back then it was just a game. A stupid game. And you agreed. I didn't think you'd actually care, she said, her tone incredulous. It's not like I'm leaving you. It was one night, Mark. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything, I said, my voice shaking. You lied to me. You lied to yourself. And for what? Some guy you thought was a celebrity? Newsflash, Sarah, he's not. He's a con artist. Her face went pale at that. What are you talking about? I told her everything Brian had told me. Her expression shifted from shock to anger, then to something I couldn't quite place. Embarrassment? Shame? I couldn't tell, and at that point I didn't care. You're lying, she said finally. You're just saying that to hurt me. I laughed bitterly. You think I need to make anything up? You did this, Sarah. You did this to yourself. She didn't respond. Instead, she walked past me, heading upstairs. I followed her, unable to stop myself. What are you doing? I demanded. I need some space, she said without turning around. I can't deal with this right now. I stared at her retreating back, my hands clenched into fists. She couldn't deal with this? What about me? What about our kids? What about the life we'd built together, now lying in ruins because of her selfishness? That night, I slept in the guest room, or rather, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened. By morning, I had my answer. There was no making sense of it. There was no salvaging this marriage. Sarah had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. Over breakfast, I told her I wanted a divorce. She looked up from her coffee, her eyes widening in surprise. Mark, don't be ridiculous. It was one night. It doesn't matter, I said, my voice steady. You broke my trust. You broke our vows. And now you're trying to downplay it like it's nothing. I can't live like this, Sarah. I won't. For a moment, she looked like she might argue. But then she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Fine, she said, her voice cold. If that's what you want, it's what I need, I said. Filing for divorce was both the hardest and easiest decision I'd ever made. Hard because it meant letting go of the life I thought we had. Easy because I knew there was no other option. Sarah had destroyed everything we'd built together, and there was no going back. I didn't tell the kids right away. Ethan and Lily deserved better than to be caught in the middle of this mess. But as the weeks went by and the legal proceedings began, the truth became impossible to hide. It's not your fault, I told them when the time came. Sometimes people change, and when they do, it's better to move on. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. They didn't need to know the details, at least not yet. For now, It was enough that we had each other. And as for Sarah, she'd made her bed. Now, she had to lie in it. The day after I told Sarah I wanted a divorce, I knew I had to start preparing for the battle ahead. As much as I wanted to believe she'd accept responsibility for what she'd done and let this process play out amicably, I knew her well enough to expect resistance. Sarah wasn't the type to admit defeat quietly. She'd fight this, and she'd fight dirty if she had to. I met with a lawyer, someone Brian recommended. Her name was Rachel Carmichael, and from the moment I walked into her office, I felt like I was in good hands. Rachel was sharp, direct, and didn't waste time with pleasantries. She asked questions quickly, took notes efficiently, and within minutes, she had outlined a strategy. "You mentioned a marriage contract," Rachel said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "Does it include a clause about infidelity?" "Yes," I said, nodding. "We both agreed to it before we got married. If either of us is unfaithful, the other gets a more favorable division of assets." Rachel leaned back in her chair, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Good. That gives us leverage. But we'll need evidence, solid evidence. Do you have anything concrete?" The first piece of evidence I handed her was the story Brian had told me about Sarah's so-called celebrity encounter. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "We'll need more than hearsay," she said. "If your friend's colleagues saw them together, we'll need a statement. Ideally, we'll want photos, messages, anything that confirms her infidelity." "I'll get what you need," I promised. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights and secret investigations. I started going through Sarah's emails and text messages, something I'd never done before, but now felt justified in doing. What I found was both heartbreaking and infuriating. There were messages from her actor, whose real name turned out to be Liam Edwards, a traveling consultant who had perfected the art of impersonation. The emails were flirtatious, filled with inside jokes, and in some cases explicit. I took screenshots of everything, saving them onto a flash drive. Then I hired a private investigator to track down Liam. The PI, a no-nonsense woman named Amanda, worked quickly. Within a week, she found Liam and managed to get him to sign a photo he'd given Sarah during their night together. His signature included a note, "To the beautiful Sarah, thank you for an unforgettable night." It was damning, and I knew it would be a key piece of evidence in court. In the meantime, I recorded conversations with Sarah using my phone's voice memo app. I'd bring up the topic of her infidelity casually, pretending I was still trying to understand her reasoning. Her responses were telling. "It was just one night," she said in one recording, her voice exasperated. "Why can't you let it go? It's not like I love him." "That's not the point, Sarah," I replied calmly, though my heart was pounding. "You broke our vows." "You're being dramatic," she snapped. "If anything, you should be thanking me for being honest about it." In another conversation, she admitted to seeing Liam more than once. "Okay, fine," she said after I pressed her. "We had drinks a few times after work conferences. It wasn't a big deal." I saved every recording, labeling them carefully for Rachel to review. When I brought the evidence to Rachel, she was impressed. "You've done well," she said, flipping through the printed emails and photographs. "This is more than enough to build a strong case." She drafted the divorce papers, including a clause citing infidelity as the reason for dissolution. Under the terms of our marriage contract, I would get the house, primary custody of the children, and a larger share of our joint savings. When Sarah received the papers, she was livid. She stormed into the house one evening while I was helping Ethan with his homework. Her face was red, her hands shaking as she waved the documents in the air. "What the hell is this, Mark?" she demanded. I sent Ethan upstairs before answering her. "It's the next step," I said simply. "You knew this was coming." "This is ridiculous," she spat. "You're trying to take everything from me." "I'm taking what's mine," I said, my voice steady. "You made your choices, Sarah. Now you have to live with the consequences." She threw the papers onto the table, glaring at me. "I'm not signing this." "That's your choice," I said. "But I should warn you. My lawyer is prepared to go to court. And with the evidence I have, you won't win." Over the next few weeks, Sarah tried every tactic in the book to sway me. She started with denial, claiming the emails and photos were fake. When that didn't work, she shifted to guilt, reminding me of the good times we'd shared and the family we'd built. Think about the kids, Mark, she said one evening, tears streaming down her face. Do you really want to put them through this? They'll be fine, I said. What they won't be fine with is growing up in a house built on lies. When guilt didn't work, she turned to manipulation, accusing me of being cold and unforgiving. You're not perfect either, she said during one heated argument. Maybe I wouldn't have looked elsewhere if you'd paid more attention to me. That's rich, I said, laughing bitterly. Blame me for your affair. Classic. The final straw came when Sarah tried to involve our children. She pulled Ethan and Lily aside, painting me as the villain and herself as the victim. Ethan, ever the perceptive one, saw through her lies and confronted her. Mom, he said, his voice trembling with anger, stop trying to make Dad look bad. You're the one who messed up. That night, Ethan came to my room and hugged me tightly. I'm on your side, Dad, he said. Whatever happens, I've got your back. His words gave me the strength I needed to push forward. I was done with Sarah's games, done with her lies. The divorce couldn't come soon enough. The day of the trial arrived, and I felt a mix of nervousness and resolve as I walked into the courthouse. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was about exposing the lies Sarah had spun and proving, once and for all, that I had been wronged. Rachel, my lawyer, walked beside me, a tower of calm confidence. She'd prepared meticulously for this day, and I trusted her completely. Sarah was already there when we entered the courtroom. She sat beside her friend Lisa, who had become her constant shadow since the divorce proceedings began. Lisa had always been loyal to Sarah, but now that loyalty had morphed into something toxic. They whispered to each other as I took my seat, their eyes darting toward me with a mix of contempt and unease. When the proceedings began, Sarah's lawyer, a slick-talking man named Evan Blake, tried to paint her as the victim of a controlling and vindictive husband. He claimed that my evidence was fabricated and that I was using the divorce to punish Sarah for asserting her independence. It was a laughable argument, but I kept my expression neutral, knowing that Rachel would dismantle it piece by piece. The first shock came when Sarah took the stand. She swore under oath that she had never been unfaithful and accused me of concocting the entire story to gain an unfair advantage in the divorce. Lisa, her so-called friend, backed up her claims, testifying that Sarah had been nothing but a devoted wife and mother. I felt a surge of anger as I listened to their lies, but Rachel placed a reassuring hand on my arm. Let them dig their hole, she whispered. We'll bury them in it. When it was our turn, Rachel began by presenting the evidence we collected. She started with the emails, pages upon pages of flirtatious and explicit messages between Sarah and her so-called celebrity. Then came the phone records, showing dozens of calls and texts exchanged late at night while I was home with the kids. But the real bombshell came when Rachel played the video confession. It was one of the recordings I'd made during our arguments, where Sarah admitted to her affair and dismissed it as just one night. The courtroom fell silent as her voice echoed through the speakers. It was just one night, she said in the recording, her tone dismissive. It doesn't mean anything. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Sarah's face turned red as the video ended. Evan tried to object, but the judge overruled him, allowing Rachel to continue. Next, Rachel presented the piece de resistance, the signed photograph from Liam Edwards, the man Sarah had believed to be a famous actor. The signature, complete with a note about their unforgettable night, was undeniable proof of their encounter. But Rachel didn't stop there. She'd done her homework, and what she revealed next sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. Liam Edwards wasn't just a fraud. He was a known con artist who had a history of posing as celebrities to lure women into one-night stands. Worse, he was also known to be a carrier of multiple sexually transmitted diseases. The revelation hit Sarah like a freight train. Her confident facade crumbled as Rachel presented medical records and witness statements linking Liam to a string of similar cases across the country. The judge's expression darkened as he reviewed the evidence, and even Evan looked shaken. When it came time for Sarah to respond, she tried to deny everything. I didn't know he wasn't who he said he was, she said, her voice trembling. And I didn't lie under oath. I just didn't want to embarrass my family. Rachel didn't let her off the hook. So, you're admitting now that the affair did happen? She asked, her tone razor-sharp. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Evan for guidance. Yes, she said finally, her voice barely audible. And your friend Lisa, Rachel continued, turning her attention to the other woman. Did she know about the affair? Lisa stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. I was just trying to help Sarah, she said weakly. She told me it was all a misunderstanding. Rachel raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding? So, you decided to lie under oath to cover for her? Lisa's face turned pale, and she looked away, unable to answer. By the time the trial concluded, the evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. The judge not only ruled against Sarah, but also found her and Lisa guilty of perjury. They were fined and given probation, a punishment that seemed lenient given the damage they'd caused, but it was enough to clear my name and cement my victory. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about winning the case. It was about reclaiming my dignity and moving forward with my life. Rachel smiled as we stepped outside, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. You did it, she said. It's over. I nodded, taking a deep breath as the weight of the past few months began to lift. Yeah, I said. It's over. After the trial, I thought I'd finally put everything behind me. But life had other plans for Sarah, and by extension, for me. The court ruling had stripped her of almost everything: her job, her reputation, and most importantly, custody of the kids. It was hard to feel sympathy for someone who had brought so much chaos into our lives. Yet there was a part of me that felt a twinge of sadness when I saw how far she'd fallen. Sarah's downfall began almost immediately after the trial. Word about the court's findings spread quickly, especially the details about her affair with the so-called celebrity and the fact that he turned out to be a con artist with a history of spreading STDs. It was the kind of story that the local press couldn't resist, and soon, Sarah's name was plastered across headlines and social media. The scandal hit her workplace like a bomb. Sarah had been working as a regional manager for a well-known retail chain, a position she'd fought hard to earn. But her employer was quick to distance itself from her once the details of her personal life became public. They issued a curt statement about maintaining their company's reputation and terminated her contract. I've worked there for over a decade, Sarah had sobbed to me during one of our tense post-trial handovers of the kids. They didn't even give me a chance to explain. I didn't reply. What was there to say? She had spent years lying to me, betraying me, and now the consequences were catching up to her. Things only got worse from there. Unable to find a new job due to her tarnished reputation, Sarah started lashing out at anyone who questioned her. Friends who had stood by her during the trial began to distance themselves, realizing that supporting her was now a liability. Lisa, her partner in crime during the trial, was one of the first to disappear. After being convicted of perjury, Lisa had little choice but to cut ties with Sarah and focus on rebuilding her own shattered life. For the kids, the fallout was even more painful. Ethan and Lily were old enough to understand what was happening, and they struggled with the whispers and stares from classmates who had read about their mother's scandal online. I did my best to shield them from the worst of it, but there was only so much I could do. When the court awarded me full custody, it was a bittersweet victory. The kids were relieved to stay with me, but they couldn't help feeling abandoned by their mother. The breaking point for Sarah came about 2 months after the trial, when a local journalist approached her for an interview. I found out about it later through a mutual acquaintance, but the details were shocking. The journalist, a young woman named Megan Carter, had asked Sarah for her side of the story. Megan thought she was being fair, giving Sarah a chance to explain herself, but Sarah saw it as an ambush. Witnesses said Sarah flew into a rage, screaming obscenities at Megan in the middle of a crowded cafe. When Megan tried to leave, Sarah grabbed her by the arm and shoved her against a table. The incident was caught on a patron's phone, and the video quickly went viral. It wasn't long before the police got involved, and Sarah was arrested for assault. The trial for the assault case was brief, but the outcome was devastating for Sarah. The court sentenced her to 6 months in prison, citing her violent behavior and lack of remorse. By this point, she had alienated almost everyone in her life. Even her family, who had tried to support her during the divorce proceedings, had distanced themselves, unwilling to deal with the constant drama. For me, Watching Sarah's downward spiral was a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. I didn't enjoy seeing her suffer, but I couldn't deny that her actions had brought all of this upon herself. My priority was the kids, and I focused on creating a stable, loving environment for them while their mother served her sentence. The 6 months Sarah spent in prison were a turning point for all of us. Ethan and Lily began to heal, their confidence slowly returning as they adjusted to life without their mother's chaos. I threw myself into work and parenting, doing everything I could to give them a sense of normalcy. When Sarah was released, she reached out to me, asking for a chance to see the kids. I agreed, but only under strict conditions. The visit took place at a supervised facility, and the kids were understandably hesitant. Sarah looked different, thinner, older, and more subdued. She apologized to them, tears streaming down her face, but her words fell hollow. Ethan barely spoke to her, and Lily only managed a polite hello before retreating behind me. After the visit, Ethan said, "Dad, can we not do that again? I don't think she's changed." Sarah's life after prison was a shadow of what it had once been. She moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, working part-time at a local diner to make ends meet. Occasionally, I'd hear from mutual acquaintances about her struggles, health issues, financial problems, and ongoing battles with depression. It was a tragic end to what had once been a promising life, but it was also a reminder of the importance of choices and consequences. For the kids and me, the experience brought us closer together. We learned to rely on each other, finding strength in our shared resilience. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined us. Instead, we focused on building a future filled with honesty, love, and respect. After everything that had happened, I was certain Sarah's role in my life was over. She had betrayed me, lied under oath, and humiliated not just me, but our entire family. Still, when I heard through a mutual friend that she wanted to apologize, a small part of me, some lingering thread of old feelings, was curious. Would she finally take responsibility for her actions? Sarah called one evening while the kids were at a friend's house. Her voice was shaky, almost desperate. "I just want to talk," she said. "Please just give me one chance." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop outside of town where no one would recognize us. She arrived looking worn down, her once confident demeanor replaced by something fragile and unfamiliar. As she sat across from me, I braced myself for whatever excuse or justification she had prepared. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I messed up everything. I ruined us, and I ruined myself." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her guilt. For a moment, I almost believed her sincerity. But then she added, "I didn't think you'd ever find out." There it was, the truth behind her apology. She wasn't sorry for the betrayal itself. She was sorry for getting caught. Any flicker of compassion I'd felt vanished in that instant. "I don't think you understand," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "This isn't about you being found out. It's about the years of lies, the disregard for our family, and the fact that you didn't care about the consequences until they blew up in your face." She flinched but didn't argue. I just thought, maybe we could try again? For the kids. The audacity of her suggestion made me laugh, a bitter sound that echoed in the quiet cafe. "You think this is about the kids? They've already been through enough because of you. The last thing they need is to watch me make the mistake of letting you back into our lives." The conversation ended shortly after that. Sarah left in tears, but I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. As for me, I was done. Done with the lies, the manipulation, and the endless cycle of false hope and disappointment. I blocked her number the next day. There was nothing left to say, no loose ends to tie up. My focus was now solely on Ethan and Lily. They deserved a father who was present, strong, and unwavering in his commitment to their well-being. Sarah's presence in their lives was limited to supervised visits, and even those became less frequent as time went on. Raising 2 kids on my own wasn't easy, but it was rewarding in ways I hadn't anticipated. Ethan threw himself into sports, finding an outlet for his frustration and energy, while Lily discovered a love for painting that filled her room with vibrant canvases. Watching them grow and thrive reminded me every day of why I had to stay strong. Financially, we were stable. The fallout from the divorce had motivated me to work harder, and my career flourished as a result. I even started mentoring younger employees, sharing the lessons I'd learned about resilience and perseverance. My life, once defined by Sarah's betrayal, was now a testament to moving forward. One evening, as I helped Lily frame one of her paintings, she asked, "Do you think Mom will ever really say she's sorry?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly. "But whether she does or doesn't, it doesn't change who we are or what we have." Lily nodded thoughtfully, her fingers smudged with paint. "I'm glad we have you." Her words hit me harder than any apology from Sarah ever could. They were a reminder that my role as a father was more important than anything else. The past was behind us, and the future was ours to shape. Years passed, and life continued to improve. Ethan earned a scholarship to play college football, and Lily's art was featured in a local gallery. Their achievements were milestones, not just for them, but for all of us. We had overcome so much together, and now we were finally free to enjoy the lives we'd built. As for me, I found happiness in the simplest things. A quiet evening with a good book, a weekend spent hiking with the kids, or the satisfaction of completing a project at work. I didn't need grand gestures or dramatic endings to feel fulfilled. My peace came from knowing I had done everything I could to protect my family and rebuild our lives. Looking back, I realized the importance of honesty, trust, and responsibility, not just in relationships, but in every aspect of life. Sarah's betrayal had been a devastating blow, but it also taught me invaluable lessons about resilience and self-worth. I was no longer the man who had let her lies define him. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to create a future free from the shadows of the past. For Ethan, Lily, and me, that future was bright. We had each other, and that was enough. Dear viewers, thank you so much for listening to our story all the way to the end. Your support inspires us to keep bringing you exciting tales and creating even more engaging content. Every like, comment, and subscription helps us grow and motivates us to come up with something new and thrilling just for you. Stay tuned. There are many more incredible stories ahead, and together, we'll make our YouTube channel truly unique. Thank you for being with us.